Good afternoon, all. And listen, well done. You know, I'm the last speaker, I think, at this stage this afternoon. Well done for getting here. I hope you've all had a really interesting day. I've had some really good conversations, so I hope you have as well. Anyway, I'm here to give you a bit of an insight of delivering a really good integrated transport system in the 21st century and what that looks like from the local authority perspective. Now, we're all trying to deliver for our communities up and down the country really good choices in transport to get to employment, to get to training and education, for the social aspects of our life, etc. Because that's what equals quality of life. We want prosperous communities, we want vibrant economies, and transport is just an enabler to that. So our role as a local transport authority is to try and put that into place for our residents and our communities, so we've got a prosperous society and a strong, thriving economy in our area. However, there are a few wee challenges from the local authority perspective in doing that. I'm going to go through a couple of those, and then I'll go on to maybe some of the things that are happening on the ground to deal with that. First one is, I can't get away from money in this day and age, can we? Sorry, it's dead boring, isn't it? But, you know, unfortunately it's there and we can't ignore it. We don't have enough money to maintain our highways the way we would like to the condition we would like to, and to the condition our residents and businesses would like. I think that's the other important thing as well. We get funding from central government, from the Department for Transport, and that's stayed relatively static over the last decade or so. Up a wee bit, down a wee bit, but relatively static. Actually, the demand for the interventions is just gone that way. It's grown and grown and grown. So unfortunately, nationally, we're seeing a decline in the condition of our highway network, which is a real challenge for us. We also don't have sufficient funding to implement improvements to our network, because it doesn't matter what mode you're travelling by, everybody uses at some point the road network out there, and it does need improvements from time to time, either asset renewal or capacity improvements, etc. Government had previously funding streams, ad hoc, competitive funding streams to allow local authorities to bid into for those big bits of infrastructure. This government has said they're moving away from those competitive funding streams. I think most authorities would really welcome that, because great if you're successful, but actually if you're unsuccessful, there's a lot of resource that's gone into that, and you've not got anything to show for that. We're still waiting to hear what will come, what will be this government's answer to funding those big infrastructure improvements. We've seen some areas have a boost in terms of funding over the last few years, which has been really, really welcome. Up there, buses, bus service improvement plans, lots of funding's been coming through for buses, so really positive. Doesn't matter whether it's urban areas, rural areas, we can do a lot more for public transport. Challenge around that, however, the funding tends to be in really short periods. We're talking about spending over a couple of years. I'm sure you'll appreciate procuring bus services to really grow your local market in terms of your patronage over 1 or 2 years is not the best way to use your money. So there's some challenges with that. We really welcome the funding, but in terms of some of the criteria around it, maybe it doesn't give us best bang for our bucks. And best outcomes for our communities, I should add in. Active travel funding, walking, cycling, there's been lots of that coming through, but again, just the tip of the iceberg. To give you a scale, my authority gets roughly in the low single-digit millions for that. Just one local walking and cycling infrastructure plan for one of my market towns costed up is over 100 million. That's just one community within my area. So, you know, to do what we want to do is going to be a very long time. Developer contributions through new development and growth, always welcome in terms of the funding and the ability then to deliver additional things for your network, but it's certainly not the panacea and the answer to everything. We've got the challenge of decarbonisation. That's on everybody's agenda, isn't it? How do we decarbonise transport? One of the biggest emitters in this country, isn't it? We're on a time clock. We all know 2050 is getting nearer. And we've got the challenge of how we decarbonise that. How do we achieve the mode shift that's going to help us decarbonise? I think it's fair to say local authorities have been working with their communities to try and achieve reasonable elements or reasonable proportions of mode shift for, I would say, a few decades now. And unfortunately, I'd say we're tinkering at the edges in terms of the success we've had. We need to keep at it, but there needs to be more to help that push to really get some decent levels of mode shift there. Yes, we've got EVs coming, haven't we? Alternative fuels, that's great, but it's not the answer to everything, because in terms of the health outcomes of the population, in terms of congestion, still takes space. We've got limited, confined, constrained networks. It's not the answer. And nobody yet has answered the question for me. Actually, if we have mass-scale movement to EVs, it's really building a momentum, but it's still a small proportion of the vehicle fleet at the moment. If we get that, do we have the energy networks? Do we have that? Is that capable of facilitating? We're all aware of hold-ups with the energy sector in terms of connections into either new developments or switching fleets for major logistics companies. Actually, that constraint on the energy network is a big factor, something we're going to have to deal with. Another challenge then is for us as highway authorities, decarbonising our own operations. I have an in-house delivery for my highways work. How do I make sure what we are doing is decarbonised in terms of the materials I'm using, our practices? Yes, we can green our fleet. Very challenging when actually like for like, EV is far more expensive than the traditional diesel. When you're talking about a gritter and it's 3 times the cost, etc. Very difficult case for me to make with my Section 151 officer, given our financial challenges. So certainly there for loads of challenges for us to think about there. And the last challenge I'd say on the horizon is resilience and adaptation. We have to be able to adapt our transport operations and our transport networks so they're far more resilient. Climate change is here, isn't it? You know, how often are we getting a named storm these days? How often are you reading about flooding, either in your local area or somewhere nationally? It's not, 2040, 2050, where it's here now and we're dealing with it. And at the moment, I think we're at the very start of that journey to understand how we adapt both our operations, our transport networks, our practices to make sure we're as resilient as we can be so it still functions and we're not absolutely, knocked out for a period of time and then struggling with recovery, because these things are happening here now. Really positive to see ADEPT are holding a webinar for local authorities later this month to really begin to highlight this issue and then follow that up with some regional seminars. So stuff happening there, but we've got a long way to go. Some of those other things that are happening to help us move forward. Multi-year funding settlements, we're promised that by this government, so we eagerly await the spending review that's coming up later in the spring. I think June is the latest announcement on that. Anything more than the 1-year funding allocations we get and living hand to mouth and our ability to plan, programme and get more bang for our bucks, it would be really, really welcome. National Highways gets a 5-year programme, Network Rail gets a 5-year allocation. Why can't local authorities get multi-year funding? It's been promised, so we're really looking forward to it and can't wait. But actually, if the size of the pie is still the same, we've got an overarching problem, haven't we? We still don't have enough money in the system. It's really positive. The current government are undertaking a review of how local government is funded. And as president of ADEPT, I sit in a working group led by MHCLG that's looking at how we do that. Everything from business rates, retention, council tax, funding formulas, and I think we all know in local government, and definitely as directors of place, until they sort out how they're funding social care, because when you think about 70 to 80% of a local authority's budget is spent on social care, Whatever I do in place in highways and transport and environment and waste, it's just blowing out the water, until they actually manage to contain the growth and the funding that has to go into social care. Another positive thing coming, we all know the integrated national transport strategy is coming. Isn't it great to have a national transport strategy? I can't remember having one, and I've been in this business for a long time. But it'd be really, really good to have that national direction. But it's got to have teeth. If it's motherhood and apple pie, we'll still keep doing the same thing. It's got to really have some teeth. But there's a real opportunity coming down the line with that. We can't forget about innovation, can we? Tech, AI, it's happening 300 miles an hour. But actually, there's loads of opportunities for us. How we deliver our services, what we're delivering, what our communities want, and what they actually need. AI innovation has got a big part to play, and we've got to be on the forefront. The challenges for local authorities is individual local highway and transport authorities. We don't actually have the money or the headspace to trial everything. So we need innovation de-risked for us. So we know that when we do invest in it, it's a good bet. So that's why programs like ADEPT, Live Labs 2, funded by DFT, £30 million of investment in innovation there, how to decarbonise transport. And there's a session at 3 o'clock, there's a bit of a plug this afternoon on Live Labs, so get to that if you can. But that's why they're so important, because they de-risk innovation for local authorities and allow us to take forward the really good things and leave behind the things that actually aren't going to move us forward. Devolution, that's coming down the line, and it's a real opportunity, I think. So for the areas that haven't got that yet, that actually ability to plan in a much bigger geography, both for your transport, your strategic transport, it's no good doing it in a really small geography. You've got to really understand your priorities across your strategic transport network and be able to deliver those, and you do that best at a really big geography. So that, aligned with the requirement for your combined authorities, your strategic mayoral authorities, they're required now to develop a strategic development strategy. So basically your planning strategy for that larger area gives us the opportunity really to integrate land use and transport planning. We've been trying to do it for years. I'd say with success in some areas, limited in others, depending on levels of governance in that area. But this devolution really gives us an opportunity to do that. So really another positive step there. Might take a while in some areas, but hopefully it's coming to fruition. But there are other things I think we need to be doing that maybe aren't on the agenda at the moment. Personal view of mine, national demand management. Road user charging, is the door open for a conversation on that? I talked about mode shift earlier. We have been trying to do that for years. We've provided new infrastructure, come and use our shiny buses, look at our great cycle lanes, etc., come and use them, but actually limited impact. We've tried behaviour change programs, etc. Some areas, particularly in urban areas, tends to get better traction. Rural areas, far more of a challenge. Actually, what's going to come along to help us instigate and really see a step change in that? Something like demand management, it's got to be at a national level, helps generate revenue, and actually helps people think about their mode of travel and hit some of those other outcomes we're trying to achieve as a society for our places. I think a national lead in resilience, and I mentioned that DFT are doing something later in this month. That needs to be sustained, because we're not going to crack resilient transport networks overnight. There's so many challenges to that. It doesn't matter whether it's flooding, whether it's heat, whether it's storm damage, whether it's cold. We're not going to crack that overnight. So it needs a real strong national lead, and that to continue over time. I think we need to get more agile. I mentioned about learning from things like Live Labs 2. There's other collaborations that happen across the highway sector. Thinking about Future Highways Research Group, Midlands Highway Alliance Plus. They're all collaborations of local authorities who undertake research, development, learning, best practice, and share. I think, I was just in a session just immediately before this around tables national highways, and we got to the end. There isn't one repository of best practice knowledge sharing for our sector. We need to get better at sharing. We need to be far more agile. We need to fail fast if we're going to fail and move on. Unfortunately, I think as highway engineers, my stereotypical thing here, we like to be absolutely sure and robust in everything and test it and test it and test it. I think we need to move away from that. We need to be far more agile and ready to adopt new things coming along and move on if they don't work. And I think there's still some work to do on the basics. One that comes to mind, in fact, I've had a few conversations about it this morning, is roadworks. Hey, unsexy, I know, absolutely, but a real issue in many, many areas of the country. The demand on the network for roadworks in terms of highway operations, in terms of obviously utility companies repairing, improving their infrastructure, and developers putting in their utilities and getting access to the network. Now bear in mind the government's massive growth agenda, another 1.5 million houses coming over the next few years. All that is going to need connections and access and digging up the road. Selfishly, from my point of view, every time somebody digs a trench in one of my highways, it's automatically reduced its lifespan by a third. I can't afford to repair what I've got at the moment. And actually, other things, utilities companies, one of my local water company, Severn Trent Water, advised me their capital programme has increased fivefold next year. I can't do it. I've got a backlog of people wanting on my network as it is. That's not talking about energy, heat networks, energy. We're talking about energy supply, national grid, etc. When they are looking to transform how they provide for the sector because of the massive requirements. That's going to impact highway networks. How are we going to manage that? We need to get far more teeth and resources to manage some basics like roadworks on the network. Just a small example, bit of a bugbear in my area. Anyway, I'm going to conclude now just to say that transport is absolutely key to ensuring that we have thriving, prosperous areas, and that's what we want to do for our local communities, the local authority area. There's loads happening to be positive. I think what I'd say after working several decades in this sector, I've never known a time with so much change, so much is happening. Doesn't matter if it's local government structures, doesn't matter if it's the funding arena, things that have not happened for years, never mind the innovation that is happening at such a major pace. That is really exciting because there's loads of opportunities to make a difference for our places and to make a difference for the transport networks for our local areas. And that's what we as directors of place will be striving to do. Thank you very much for your attention. I applaud you for being here this time in the afternoon of the last day. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. Would you take a seat? Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for joining us. We do appreciate it. Thank you. Now, at this stage, I really wanted, if that's okay with you, to open it up to the floor straight away, because I'm conscious that sometimes we've not had enough time to explore all the questions, all the areas that you would like to explore. Does anybody have any questions to Anne at this stage? Any questions for Anne at all? Any questions? Any questions on any? Yes, we have a question here. Thank you, sir. The mic will come to you.
Hiya, Nick Churchill-Evans from Curve. I asked this more as a road user, because I didn't appreciate that that trench digging reduced the lifespan of the road by a third. I mean, it's a scary number, that. Do you not have any ability to make those utility companies who are digging the road up actually resurface when they're doing it? Because, obviously there's a business case for them to do it. I know we need to put this infrastructure in, but also there's a cost that needs to be borne, and it should probably be borne by those people who are getting the benefit of it, the end users, rather than the local authority and the taxpayers who are paying their council tax. And I have to drive my car over those things, and it's really annoying.
The short answer is yes, absolutely. They have to reinstate it to, your standards, local authority for that carriageway. And if they don't, we can make them come back and do it. The issue is they've cut a line in it and there's an area of weakness. Water gets in, it freezes, etc. HGVs, something else I didn't mention. Obviously, we've got growing numbers of HGVs. EVs are heavier vehicles. It's axle weight that kills your carriageway. That's what wears it away. But fundamentally, it's because there's a weakness. So even if they reinstate it perfectly, you'll always have a weakness in that carriageway.
That really jumped out at me as well, actually. I had absolutely no idea. So that was really, really interesting, an interesting point to make. Any other questions at all, anybody, that you'd like to put to Anne at this stage? Yes, please, thank you.
Hi, Anne. Paul Campion, TRL. Thank you, very interesting remarks. You probably don't want to answer this, but a lot of the challenges you were discussing are obviously common across all local authorities. Are you confident that the CSR will deliver a settlement across the DFT and local authorities that will enable you to address those? And is that about money, or is it about collaboration, or actually is the progress needed on both?
No, interesting one. I mean, in terms of confidence of CSR, I mean, I don't know what's in their budget, etc. Just things I hear from colleagues at DFT. And as I said, there has been a commitment to multi-year settlements, which will be an improvement. I think it still remains to be seen how siloed or unsiloed the funding will be, because I think one of our frustrations as local authorities is spend this on bus, spend this on maintenance, spend this on walking and cycling. Why can we not decide what our priorities is? If mine is all maintenance, can I not put it in that? Or can I not put more of it in bus, whatever? That still remains to be seen, if they actually will be streamlining the funding pots, or if it will still be allocated in silos. And I think there's something, we as local authorities work in silos, absolutely. Collaboration is absolutely the key of it, but so does government. But even within those government departments, you end up with the silos as well. And I think until we crack that, you're absolutely right, we're still limited in what we can do. Devolution has got a role in that, because obviously those areas that are well established, they're getting single funding pots, integrated settlements, so therefore they can then spend according to their priorities. It's not dictated to. But for the areas of the country that are not there or still on that journey, I think my inclination is we'll probably still get the siloed funding. But absolutely, I think collaboration's at the heart of everything, isn't it?
Thank you. Any other questions at all? I mean, I was curious to know what you thought the biggest barriers are to achieving a fully integrated transport network. I mean, what would you say?
Biggest barriers to an integrated, that's a big question.
It is.
I mean, we'll come back to Paul's point there. Collaboration. We need to be talking to the right people so we can make the right connections. I mean, at its most basic, does your bus interface with your train timetables? For us as a local authority, the challenge is we're talking to the private sector, often for the buses, commercial ones. We're talking to, sorry, I'm pointing to my colleague over here because I know he's left Network Rail, with the train operating companies. It's not within our remit. We try and facilitate. Often things are not within our remit. So actually we're having to facilitate other organisations who have other priorities, other drivers in terms of what they can do or can't do. And often there's a regulatory thing that comes into it as well. That's another challenge to get over. So, I mean, there's quite a lot in order to do that. But I think, we've got to remember the end user, haven't we? Because it's about the customer, it's about the journey A to B, it's about being able to make it attractive enough that people are choosing that and we can make it convenient for them. If you're adding too much a time factor on it, they're not going to then interchange, etc., and you're not going to achieve any kind of integrated network. And people fall back on the car, don't we? Because that's easier, they can get to A to B. So I think the challenge, keeping the time down, making those interfaces streamlined, and equally, building the relationships, the collaboration, understanding what the constraints are on some of those players that will provide or help provide elements of that integrated journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just wondered whether we are, like I said, obviously we're coming to an end of Interchange for this year. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave our audience with? That I know your presentation was extremely comprehensive, but is there one thing or several things that you would like to say to our audience that that you think is absolutely key? Something the audience ought to consider, something that's burning passion. Is there one thing or several things that you think, actually, this is the message that I'd like to get out to people today?
I mean, I think the key thing facing us all, we've got loads of opportunities, aren't we, to make improvements. It doesn't matter what your part is as part of the overall transport system, in the sector. I think we've got opportunities to really make a difference because we've got so much change on the horizon. Well, not on the horizon, it's here, isn't it? It's happening. But I guess it'd be a challenge to everybody. I always try when I go to something like this, take away one thing and go and action it. Because I don't know about you, I've had lots of really interesting conversations today that have sparked, must find out about this, must talk to them. But you get back and you get pulled into the day job, don't you? Just do one thing to make a difference and move something forward that you wouldn't have normally. It's not part of your job. So I guess I'd leave you with a challenge to go away and do that, because I can't solve anything. You can't on your own. It's all of us together.
Absolutely. And Currathers, thank you so much for almost closing out Interchange for us this year. You've been absolutely wonderful. Some great insights. I really do appreciate you coming today and spending time with us. Let's give Anne a huge round of applause.